With God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok, Santa Monica Studios managed to create two of the highest praised video games ever made. Not just that, but they also reinvented the main protagonist Kratos, who made the transition from a brutal Spartan warrior to a single father who still hasn't lost his brutality.
Are you done having your tantrum?
You just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
The story about him, his son Atreus, and all the other great side characters like Brock, Sindri, Mimir, and Freya contains countless of memorable moments. And speaking of Atreus, am I the only one who thinks that his theme as Son's Path is an undeniable 10 out of 10? In my opinion, there are a lot of valuable lessons that we as the player can learn, especially when looking at the main protagonist Kratos. So kings and queens, let's get started.
Okay, let's go.
A very short recap in case you've forgotten or you're new to the franchise. In the first game, he and his son Atreus spread the ashes of Faye, Kratos' wife and Atreus' mother, from the highest mountain of the 9 realms, which was her last wish. Her intention was that they would bond throughout the journey and also to reveal that Atreus is the god of mischief Loki, which then also exactly happened as planned. In the second game, they have to fight the All-Father Odin as Ragnarok approaches, and this time their relationship has drastically improved compared to 2018. Nevertheless, they're separated for quite some time, but in the end they win. Kratos is now seen as a good god instead of a monster, and Atreus goes on his own adventures now.
Loki will go. Atreus remains.
See you, chump.
Moments of crisis. Panic does nothing. Harness it.
Number 1. Stoicism. Not many other fictional characters embody the Stoic philosophy better than Kratos. For those who are unfamiliar with the concept, it came from the homies Aurelius and the boys. Basically, a Stoic is someone who fulfills his responsibilities with core values like self-control, restraint, discipline, emotional stability, and virtue. Meme aside, it's basically a
calm and reasonable person.
First things first, Kratos is really good at controlling his emotions. Doesn't matter how threatening and terrifying the enemy is, he stays calm and figures out how to beat him without freaking out. He doesn't let fear take control over him, as he says in the probably most badass sentence I've ever heard.
Death can have me when it earns me.
Also, when being accused of being a coward, he stays collected and doesn't let his ego and pride get in the way of solving the situation peacefully. He only fights back Baldur after several warnings and after he punched him 3 times and therefore endangered Atreus and his safety. With Atreus we see that acting out of emotions like rage, grief and arrogance almost always got him into trouble. However, many people say being stoic is a bad way to live and we should all express our feelings all the time. We actually see what having literally no feelings does to Baldur. He hates his life and wants to kill his mother Freya for the spell that made him numb to any feelings whatsoever. But of course, Kratos is not 100% emotionless. The most obvious one is his love towards his son Atreus. I don't think I have to go over specific moments. You can basically take any scene from the 2 games and you see how much he cares for him. He's not emotionally numb, however he tries his best to stay focused on the goal so that he's like a rock that others can rely on, especially during hard and brutal times.
One of us must remain focused.
He even uses his emotions to his advantage with his Spartan rage, for example. But don't get me wrong, if I'm not mistaken, he only smiles 3 times throughout the entire 2 games, and this is the only thing that comes even close to him laughing. Another important aspect is honesty. Every time Kratos talks, he cuts right to the chase.
Is it always moral to kill something that's trying to kill you?
Yes.
While some people say his reconciliation with Freya felt rushed, I actually really liked it. He doesn't try to justify his actions and talk himself out of it. First he opens up about his past losses. Then he openly explains his regrets that he took the choice away from her, but not that he saved a close friend.
I do not regret saving your life. And never will.
He doesn't try to dodge the consequences, but faces Freya with brutal and direct honesty, which leads to her forgiving him. And we also see what the consequences of dishonesty can look like. Kratos hiding his real identity of being a god in the first game is the reason for a lot of conflict between him and Atreus. Also in Ragnarok, when Atreus tries to hide what he's doing all the time, it makes Kratos deeply distrust him. And when he confronts him, it leads to this.
The truth is you're being a complete asshole.
Just have to say that you're fine.
However hard and uncomfortable it might be, being straight, direct and honest about things is the best way to interact with others in my opinion. Also, according to Jordan Peterson, the most important rule one could follow to improve one's life is
tell the truth or at least don't lie.
Being stoic also means not succumbing to your impulses. Just look at this body out of marble. This is one example of accepting your emotions but not letting them dictate your actions. Do you think when Kratos craves sugar or any kind of fast food he would get weak? No, he tells himself,
I do not need a snack.
And moves on even when it's
olives.
He has his purpose in mind, which is keeping Atreus safe, and in order to achieve this, he needs to be as strong as possible, so engaging in behaviors that would interfere with this goal are avoided at all costs. However, Stoics do not demonize pleasure itself, but only if it interferes with your duty and purpose, as already mentioned. In the real world, we basically have unlimited amounts of pleasure around us all the time, whether it's cheap junk food, social media, dirty videos, or binge-watching TV shows. Of course, I'm not talking about consumption in moderation, but overindulging in those activities. But no one says it is easy. When Kratos has visions of his wife in the light of Alfheim, he gets weak, and as a consequence, Atreus has to fight a lot of enemies all by himself. However, when they revisit this place in Ragnarok, he's seemingly very tempted to go there again, even though he knows that it is only in his head. Stoicism will also help a lot with the next point.
Do what is necessary, not because it is written.
Number 2. Destiny. Another important aspect of the story are prophecies, fate and destiny. The characters seemingly have no control over their lives and let paintings on walls dictate them how their life is going to end up without any chance of own choice. Some examples are Angrboda, who thought that giving Atreus the giant stones was the purpose of her life, or Atreus, who was afraid that he would betray his father and join the enemy Odin, or Kratos, who's always told that he cannot change and will always be the old Spartan monster. And yes, while he cannot escape his past and undo it, he can change himself and his future actions.
But I am your monster no longer.
The same goes for character traits. Kratos identifies himself as a monster, however in the end of the second game we see that he's seen as a good god that brings peace now. He took control over his actions and actively chose to
Be better.
To be honest, I almost know nothing about Andrew Tate, however I'm aware that he's very controversial. I've recently seen an interview with Piers Morgan and him where he said that depression isn't real, however feeling depressed is.
Stop accepting the identity of a clinically depressed person.
I'm no psychologist, so I have no idea whether that's true or not, but this is exactly what I mean. Sometimes you hear people saying, no, I'm too shy, I cannot talk to her. However, this just serves as an excuse to not face their fears. By referring to themselves as a shy person and accepting this as a fact, they give away their control over their actions. Just like the prophecies, it is written in stone and nobody can change it. However, the actual problem is most likely a lack of confidence or social anxiety, and you can change these two things fairly quickly. Another great example would be
Walter Hartwell White
/
Heisenberg.
And before some of you start typing that he's an egotistical maniac, I refer to his transition in the first or maybe the first 2 seasons. In the beginning he was portrayed as a hard-working loving man, but also as a pushover. He's overqualified for his job, he's emasculated by basically everybody around him, and he's in a passionless marriage. However, after his cancer diagnosis, his entire attitude changes and he starts to stand up for himself and his family, he's respected, makes tons of money, and the passion in his marriage is back again. So no matter what we think of ourselves, we can always change and have full control over our actions. So we shouldn't let anybody tell us what to do and what we are, because we're the only ones who decide what we become.
Path, one I had never imagined.
Number 3. Monster. Despite being loving and caring towards his family and friends, Kratos also has a monster inside of him. In this regard, he's quite similar to Arthur Morgan and Joel Miller. I also made a video about him. On the one hand, there's the Arthur who loves his crew or family if you want so, and on the other hand, there's the Arthur who violently takes what he and his crew need for surviving in a good life.
Just get out of here.
Joel is also very soft and caring towards his 2 daughters Sarah and Ellie, but just like Arthur, he's like an animal when it comes to protecting them and providing for them. The same goes for Kratos. If necessary, he can take on every enemy no matter the size or strength. Masculinity is often being demonized these days, and we often hear something like,
It's okay to be weak.
I've made this example in the Joel video, but again, just imagine something horrible like a school shooting or something more common like a group of teenagers bullying a helpless kid. I highly doubt that those weak men and soy boys would be able to do something. Instead, they would turn to someone like Kratos, Arthur or Joel, just like Professor Jordan Peterson suggests.
You should be a monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
Being able to defend yourself and your loved ones is a core aspect of being a man, according to Stefan Arnios' Hard Times Create Strong Men. In this book, he talks about what it means to be a man and why the public perception of masculinity is so negative. Of course, we luckily almost never face any life-threatening events these days, but we never know when they'll come again. You've probably already heard the saying, rather be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in war.
But I am your monster no longer.
Number 4. Mistakes. Another very interesting aspect is how they deal with mistakes. One of Peterson's 12 rules for life says,
Don't bother children when they're skateboarding.
It basically points out that exposing ourselves to dangerous situations is actually helpful for our development, and that making mistakes and learning from them is just as important. Of course, it doesn't mean doing crazy things like jumping off a plane with almost no protection. I mean, we're not Tom Cruise, but our tendency to be overprotective might hurt our personal growth. Just like in Ragnarok, Kratos always says that
All that matters is that you are safe.
while it is perfectly understandable, of course, we see that every time Atreus spends time without his father, he either grows as a person or just has a good time, like when he was hanging out with Angrboda. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. For example, he unleashed the giant wolf Garm and screwed up big time. But on the other hand, he is one of the reasons why Freya joined him again. He found out Odin's real intentions and eventually was able to stop Garm.
See what I can do when you trust me?
Kratos also knows that avoiding any kind of discomfort isn't beneficial. That's why he lets Atreus go on his own adventures while being aware that it won't be easy for him.
Does it frighten you?
Yeah.
That is why you must do it.
When considering Peterson's rule, he lets Atreus partake in skateboarding, so to speak. The biggest mistakes also make us learn the most important lessons. And when having screwed up, instead of giving up, we should accept the fact, deal with it, and always remember,
We must be better.
I think another great way to learn from mistakes is by reading a lot of books. The authors have gone through many missteps as well, so instead of experiencing it ourselves, we can just read what the people we look up to have to say so that we can learn from them and save a lot of time. Thank you so much for watching the video.